North Korea's army has said it will completely cut off roads and railways connected to South Korea, starting from Wednesday. That announcement on state broadcaster KCNA likely indicates a further escalation in activity close to the demarcation line separating the two Koreas. In recent years, such activity had been rare. But this year, according to South Korea's military in July, North Korea has spent months installing landmines and barriers and creating wasteland across the heavily militarized border. The General Staff of the Korean People's Army said in a statement on KCNA that it was responding to war exercises that have been held in South Korea. The statement, which called South Korea the primary hostile state and invariable principal enemy, also pointed to frequent visits by US strategic nuclear assets in the region. South Korea's defense ministry said that the United Nations Command had been notified, but declined to give specifics. The UNC is a US-led multinational military force that oversees affairs in the demilitarized zone between the two Koreas, which remain technically at war.
חוסם את הציר, גבר, אל תחסום את הציר, תחנה בצד. לא משנה, אבל יצאו כוחות.
Mozambicans took to the polls on Wednesday. It's a tense general election expected to once again return power to the ruling party. Frelimo has governed the southern African nation since 1975. Four candidates are vying to replace President Filipe Nyusi as he steps down after serving 2 terms. The favourite is Daniel Chapo, a lawyer viewed as a safe choice and a fresh face for the long ruling party. He faces off against Venancio Mondlane, a charismatic independent candidate who draws huge crowds, main opposition leader and former rebel commander Osufo Momad, and a small opposition party leader Lutero Simango. As polling stations opened in Inhambane, voters expressed their hopes.
I hope that the elected president will be the best for our country and will improve conditions in the country, and that the elections are free, clean and transparent. I hope we won't have fraud in the country and that the elections are fair and just.
Frelimo first allowed elections in 1994 and has since been accused of rigging them, charges it denies. A disputed outcome would probably trigger protests, similar to those which were forcefully suppressed after Frelimo swept last year's municipal elections. Nyusi called for calm after casting his vote in central Maputo.
We are asking all citizens to not create disorder and not agitate others as well, so that everything happens peacefully.
Poverty is the major concern of Mozambique's 35 million people, half of whom are registered to vote. The country is also grappling with an Islamist insurgency in the north that has forced thousands to flee their homes and halted multi-billion-dollar gas projects.
We were sitting safely at home when we heard the sound of a very loud explosion. It was very strong. We did not know its source at first. Then we heard 2 other explosions. They were 3 explosions. My kids were terrified. I calmed them and went out to watch from the balcony. I saw dust all over the area. I looked from the balcony and all I could see was dust.
Understanding the collective properties of networks of simplified neurons connected by...
I'm hoping AI will lead to tremendous benefits, to tremendous increases in productivity, and to a better life for everybody. I'm convinced that it will do that in healthcare. My worry is that it may also lead to bad things. And in particular, when we get things more intelligent than ourselves, no one really knows whether we're going to be able to control them. But quite a few good researchers believe that sometime in the next 20 years, AI will become more intelligent than us. And we need to think hard about what happens then.
But I worry about anything which says, I'm big, I'm fast, I'm faster than you are, I'm bigger than you are, and I can also run you. Now, can you peacefully inhabit with me? I don't know. I worry.
You saw the strikes that Iran launched against us a short time ago. Those strikes were aggressive, but they failed because they weren't accurate. Just as we have been doing until now in the war on all other fronts, whoever attacks us will be hurt and will pay a price. Our attack will be deadly, precise, and above all, surprising. They will not understand what...
In order to understand how proteins work, you need to know what they look like. So this year, we're awarding discoveries in these two areas. Proteins,
they are antibodies that enable our immune response.
What we have done with protein design is discover how to make new proteins that can solve new problems. And so what my colleagues and I have been working on, or are working on now, is to design new proteins that would be improved medicines, improved vaccines.
We have known for over 50 years that all the information is in this pearl of strings. The floppy spaghetti knows what to do, but scientists, we don't understand that. And this is what we solved today. You know, today's prize is awarded to understanding. Now you can take a sequence of amino acids, in principle do Google search, and out comes the structure of the protein.
Just leave you with a message.
Panic buying at gas stations gripped Florida as Hurricane Milton closed in on the Tampa Bay area on Wednesday.
We've never had one like this. I've been here for 38 years and never had one that forced us to do this.
Meanwhile, officials continued to sound the alarm.
It's looking like the storm of the century.
At a White House briefing, President Joe Biden urged Florida residents to follow local safety recommendations. He also warned against disinformation about the storm and accused his predecessor of lying about ongoing relief efforts after Hurricane Helene.
Former President Trump has led the onslaught of lies. Assertions have been made that property is being confiscated. That's simply not true. They're saying the money is needed for this crisis is being diverted to migrants. What a ridiculous thing to say. It's not true. Now the claims are getting even more bizarre. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, a congresswoman of Georgia, is now saying the federal government is literally controlling the weather. We're controlling the weather. It's beyond ridiculous. It's got to stop.
FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell said the impact of the latest storm could be devastating.
Hurricane Milton is going to be a deadly and catastrophic storm. It will bring massive storm surge, high winds, and severe flooding as it moves across the state of Florida.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said thousands of National Guardsmen have been deployed to assist in recovery efforts.
We have 500 tactical vehicles, including 180 high water vehicles, aerial, water, and ground National Guard search and rescue teams. This is the largest Florida National Guard search and rescue mobilization in the entire history of the state of Florida.
The National Hurricane Center said Milton was expected to maintain hurricane strength as it crossed the Florida peninsula, posing storm surge danger on the state's Atlantic coast as well.
We have 9 African penguins, and they are on our first floor in their home. But we do have temporary home built for them, and they've moved up to the second floor, well above any type of tidal surge that might affect the building. And then we have several animals around the building that are on the ground floor that have all moved to second floor locations and safe locations that we plan for things like this. So they have nice homes, even though they may be a little temporary.
These are the smouldering remains of pine trees in Ukraine's Sviaty Hory National Park. Ranger Serhiy Tsapok cared for the octogenarian trees for almost 20 years. He used to love his daily drives through the forest.
Now when I'm driving, it's better to just stare at the road. If I were to look one of the sides, I would see something that would tear my soul apart.
Officials say 4/5 of the park's more than 29,000 acres are damaged, destroyed or contaminated with mines and ordnance. But that's a drop in the ocean of the damage caused by the war with Russia. The conflict has brutalised much of Ukraine's 24 million acres of forest and landscape. Troops on both sides blast thousands of shells at each other every day, shredding the earth in grinding combat. And innovations in warfare are further decimating the landscape. Ukraine's 108th Territorial Defence Brigade posted videos of a drone trying to flush out Russians by spraying a red-hot substance onto trees below, setting the woodland alight. The job of tending the forest has become perilous, ex-Environment Minister Ruslan Strilets explained.
If we want to extinguish a fire quickly, it's impossible, because the entire territory is mined. There is a risk of being killed or maimed.
One ranger nearly lost a foot after stepping on a mine. He managed to crawl back to the car and drive home. Reuters spoke to nearly 20 specialists who provided a detailed picture of the ruin wrought on Ukraine's forests. Russian authorities didn't respond to requests for comment. After 31 months of war, all that remains of many forests in eastern Ukraine are fields of stripped, broken trunks. It's torn through the habitat of much of the local wildlife, including a globally endangered species of wild horse. And while protecting the environment isn't the highest priority for a country trying to repel an invading army, experts have raised great concerns about the ongoing destruction's impact and the bleak natural legacy left behind.
Tense scenes unfolded in Buenos Aires on Wednesday after the latest setback for student protesters against Argentina's libertarian leader Javier Milei. The lower house of Congress failed to gather enough votes to overturn President Milei's veto of a law that would have increased university funding. For Milei, it is a victory amid mass protests against his cuts to education and healthcare. Demonstrators clashed with police, shouting slogans and pushing against barricades as riot officers attempted to disperse the crowd.
They are going after everything. And the worst thing is that we knew they would go after everything. They are attacking education, they are attacking culture and public health. They hate the people, they hate the working class, and they hate the poor. There is a lot of anguish.
Milei vetoed the bill last month, which had aimed to adjust public university funding to match Argentina's high inflation. Despite 160 lawmakers voting in favor of a veto override, it fell 6 votes short of the required 2/3 majority. Although Milei's far-right party is a minority in Congress, it has allied with conservative lawmakers to block the opposition. The president argues that the law would threaten fiscal stability during a severe economic crisis, with health, pension and education spending facing the most significant cuts. Under his austerity drive, high inflation has started to slow, but Argentina is in deep recession and poverty rates have surged over 50%. But opposition to the president's spending cuts, especially to education funding, still retains impassioned support.
Taiwan's leader Lai Ching-te used a keynote speech to strike both hard and conciliatory tones toward mainland China on Thursday. President Lai took office in May and is detested by Beijing, who calls him a separatist. Outside the presidential office in Taipei, he said China had no right to represent Taiwan, but also tried to offer some form of cooperation on issues like climate change. Lai used Taiwan's formal name, the Republic of China, whereas mainland China's formal name is the People's Republic of China.
The Republic of China has already put down roots in Taiwan, Penghu, Kinmen, and Matsu, and it is not subordinate to the People's Republic of China. On this land, democracy and freedom are growing and thriving. The People's Republic of China has no right to represent Taiwan.
China sees Taiwan, which is run democratically, as its own territory, but Lai and his government disagree. He says only the people of Taiwan can decide their future. On Thursday, he also says that his government and Beijing should work together to address climate change, fight infectious disease, and maintain regional security. However, earlier this week, Beijing accused Lai of increasing tensions. Taiwan's defense ministry said on Wednesday that China carried out another joint combat readiness patrol around the island, which Taipei calls regular military harassment. Lai says he has repeatedly suggested talks with Beijing, but been turned down. The Republic of China has already put down roots in Taiwan, Penghu, Kinmen, and Matsu, and it is not subordinate to the People's Republic of China. On this land, democracy and freedom are growing and thriving. The People's Republic of China has no right to represent Taiwan. The 23 million people of Taiwan, now more than ever, must reach out our branches to embrace the future.
I did not hear the explosions. I only heard when glass shards started to fall. An explosive wave pushed my mother and I from the bed, and we fell on the floor. We were covered in shards of glass.
What is not tracking well is the deeply concerning misogynistic narrative that reared its head before our people had even made it home to New Zealand. A court of inquiry has been stood up to establish what caused this terrible incident. The one thing that we already know did not cause it is the gender of the ship's captain. I'm appalled to see the comments online from these armchair admirals. People who will never have to make decisions which mean life or death for their subordinates. I'm appalled to hear that our women in uniform are being abused in the street because of this incident.
So what we found is that Vice President Kamala Harris is now leading both among suburban voters and among middle-class voters. That's households making $50,000 to $100,000 a year, and that is a profound change in the election since she replaced Joe Biden at the top of the ticket. A review of our Reuters Ipsos polling from the final 2 months of Biden's campaign showed that Donald Trump, the Republican candidate, had taken a lead in both of those critical demographic groups. And what this review shows is that since coming in, Harris has reversed that. She's picked up 9 points in each of those groups. It's important to note that this doesn't mean that she's running away with it. This is the way that she's made what had been an election that Trump was really showing advantages in, highly competitive, but it's still a very close race. National opinion polls, such as the Reuters Ipsos poll and individual state polls, all show that. But this is important because the suburbs are, one, very representative of America at large. They are just as racially diverse as the rest of the country is. And two, really where elections are fought. Democrats have very strong advantages in cities typically, and Republicans have very strong advantages typically in rural areas. So it's those suburban areas, those middle income areas that are really critical for presidential elections.
Ambulances raced dead and wounded to an already overcrowded hospital in Deir al-Balah in the Gaza Strip on Thursday, following an Israeli strike on a school sheltering displaced people. Some of the wounded were treated on the hospital floor. Medics said the strike killed at least 28 people, including women and children. The Israeli military said it carried out what it called a, quote, precise strike on terrorists who had a command and control center embedded in a school. In a statement, the military said, quote, this is a further example of the Hamas terrorist organization's systematic abuse of civilian infrastructure in violation of international law. Hamas denied the allegation. Medics said 54 other people were wounded in the strike. More than 1 million people have sought shelter in Deir al-Balah after fleeing fighting elsewhere after more than a year of war. Israel launched a devastating air and ground operation in the densely populated Gaza Strip after Hamas-led militants raided Israeli communities on October 7, 2023, killing 1,200 and taking more than 200 hostages, according to Israeli tallies. Israel has pledged to root out Hamas and free its captives. Palestinian health officials say more than 42,000 people have been killed in the onslaught. Most of Gaza's 2.3 million people have been displaced, and much of the enclave has been laid to waste. And fighting continues in areas already ravaged. Israeli forces are pushing forward in Jabalia, in the northern Gaza Strip. Palestinian health officials say at least 130 people have been killed so far in that operation, which Israel says is aimed at preventing Hamas from regrouping. The military has told residents to evacuate an area in which the UN estimates more than 400,000 people are trapped. Health officials say the Israeli military gave patients and medics 24 hours to abandon 3 hospitals. The director of Kamal Adwan Hospital said 8 patients, mostly children, were at risk inside the intensive care units should the army force them to evacuate. He said Israel was refusing to allow fuel to reach the hospital.
Conditions are catastrophic and will further deteriorate if additional steps are not taken.
The situation in northern Gaza is so desperate that the U.S. envoy to the United Nations told the Security Council this week Israel needed to speed the delivery of aid to civilians.
As election authorities tally the votes from Mozambique's national election, another count is underway. Civil society monitors are compiling a parallel tally to try to detect possible signs of fraud. The ruling Frelimo party is widely expected to extend its 49 years in power after the Southern African country voted on Wednesday. Frelimo candidate Daniel Chapo is seen as the frontrunner. His party has been constantly accused of rigging elections, which it denies. To check that, staff from the Observer Mission More Integrity are uploading pictures of handwritten results sheets from polling stations sent in by their observers. An app they created then pulls the data and crunches the numbers. Analgencio Macamo is a data analyst for the group.
This is very important. First, historically speaking, the electoral process in Mozambique is characterized by fraud and electoral violence, among other things. So the Mozambican electoral process is not free, fair, and transparent.
Some observer missions noted issues with preliminary vote counting that took place overnight. Teresa Xavier, a representative from the Observer Mission Peace Room, said at least 210 polling stations denied journalists and observers access to witness counting. Official results normally take around 2 weeks to be announced by the Electoral Commission. Past elections have shown significant discrepancies between the official and parallel counts. Maputo resident Antonio Dimas said he's skeptical about the process.
I think that nothing is going to change, and they're promising this and that, and things stay the same.
Argentina's triple-digit inflation is the world's highest. The cost of basic goods has skyrocketed, but salaries have stagnated. And while recent measures show the rate of inflation has begun to slow, it's little relief for Argentines trying to meet their basic needs. Daniel Vasquez is a university professor.
It's tremendous because we're losing track of what's expensive and what's cheap. Beyond the indexes, things are getting more expensive. There doesn't seem to be explanations on why, but things are getting more expensive. The only thing that isn't increasing are wages.
Analysts expect full-year inflation to be around 124% in 2024. That's despite the expectation that September inflation will have slowed to a month-to-month rate of 3.5%, with the same rate of monthly increase in October. Libertarian President Javier Milei's austerity drive has seen him cut subsidies to sectors like energy and transportation, while shuttering some offices and trimming jobs in the public sector. But it has prolonged a recession and caused poverty rates to surge to around 53%. Computer programmer Ivan Cortesi says food prices remain similar to last month, but his utility costs have risen significantly. And Federico Magistres is relying on support from others.
Thankfully, my family helps me so I can make it by, but I look to cut expenses however I can.
Milei devalued the local currency when he took office in December, and he has vowed to veto any law that threatens the fiscal balance.
A UN peacekeeping mission in Lebanon says Israeli forces fired on its positions on Wednesday and Thursday. The United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, or UNIFIL, says 2 of its peacekeepers were injured when an Israeli tank fired at its main headquarters in Nakura. Israel has been pursuing a widening offensive against Hezbollah in that area. A UN source said there were no casualties in 2 other incidents. UNIFIL spokesperson Andrea Tenenti.
This is highly concerning, not only because peacekeepers are there, but because this was done by, most probably a deliberate attack against our troops, which is a violation or a grave violation of international humanitarian law.
Italy has protested to Israel over the incident. Its defense minister called it illegal and a possible war crime.
We asked for the reason why these shots were fired, and we expected to know them officially. The ambassador was not able to provide us with explanations.
Israel has warned Lebanese civilians not to return to homes in the south as it presses on with its assault. On Thursday night, Israeli strikes on central Beirut killed several people and wounded dozens of others, Lebanon's health ministry said. A security source said at least 1 senior Hezbollah figure was targeted in the attacks.
The Nobel Prize in Literature for 2024 is awarded to South Korean author Han Kang for her intense poetic prose that confronts historical traumas and exposes the fragility of human life.
In her oeuvre, Han Kang, as expressed in the Academy's citation, confronts historical traumas, and in each of her works exposes the fragility of human life. She has a unique awareness of the connections between body and soul, the living and the dead, and in her poetic and experimental style has become an innovator in contemporary prose.
This is a very rich and complex oeuvre. Han Kang was born in 1970, but she has already been a published author for more than 30 years, and her works span so many different genres. And she writes this really intense lyrical prose that is both brutal and tender and sometimes slightly surrealistic, and very, very exciting to read, I think.
Smoke rose over Lebanon on Wednesday as the cross-border conflict between Hezbollah militants and Israel continued. Sirens sounded as Israel's overnight airstrikes on Lebanon's Beirut reduced some buildings to rubble, while explosions rang out in a southern Lebanese town. Meanwhile, Hezbollah said it targeted Israeli troops near the border with artillery shells and rockets. The Iran-backed movement, which had been launching rockets against Israel in solidarity with Gaza, said it pushed Israeli troops back and managed to prevent them from holding territory in Lebanon. The conflict has escalated dramatically in recent weeks. Israel has carried out a series of assassinations of top Hezbollah leaders. And after launching ground operations, Israeli troops are now clashing with militants on the ground. It's raised fears that both Iran and Israel's superpower ally, the US, could be sucked into the conflict. Israel's bombardment of Lebanon has killed more than 2,100 people, most of them in the last 2 weeks. It has forced 1.2 million people from their homes. Israel says it has no choice but to strike Hezbollah so that tens of thousands of Israelis can return to homes they...
In Beirut's Getawi hospital, burns victims lie in bed after recent Israeli strikes in Lebanon. Their bodies wrapped in bandages, they are battling physical and emotional trauma. Mahmoud Dawi is a soldier in the Lebanese army. He says since the strike hit him, he has been unable to sleep.
This war is very tough. They are bombing wherever they want, civilians, ambulances, or soldiers, hitting anyone. They affected me, made me anxious. I couldn't sleep ever since the strike, but thank God we are now better. God willing, this war ends, so these feelings of fear and terror end.
Another patient with severe burns said she was sitting in a cafe with her family and that they were, quote, minding our own business when an attack came. The hospital's burns unit has opened its doors to victims of strikes from different parts of Lebanon. According to plastic surgeon Ziad Sliman, many have burns so severe that they're unlikely to survive.
We can't perform miracles. We can treat, we can push our strength to the maximum, but we can't perform miracles.
More than 1 million Lebanese have fled their homes since Israel intensified its airstrikes and launched a ground campaign in southern Lebanon against the Iran-backed Hezbollah group. In solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza, Hezbollah has been striking Israel.
We don't like to live through this sorrow. We don't like to live through this sadness and pain. Our children die, our families die, and we die. We just want to live and nothing more. I wish peace for this country. And from my side, if the country stays like this, I would choose to flee now before tomorrow.
We fled from the bombing, from the rockets that were coming to us. Our homes were destroyed. Come and see the people who are displaced here. They have been humiliated.
Is there anyone who's not scared of war? Especially, we have a child with us. God help us and help the people.
After Hurricane Milton barreled across Florida, spawning deadly tornadoes, rescue crews waded through flooded streets to check homes and assist residents.
The storm was significant, but thankfully this was not the worst-case scenario.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said that while the storm was not as bad as feared, the damage was still widespread.
We are just beginning damage assessment. We have 10 confirmed fatalities. Our understanding is that those fatalities were caused by the tornadoes.
At a White House briefing, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said storm-related deaths so far were caused by tornadoes, but that the death toll could rise. Milton downed power lines and left more than 3 million homes and businesses without power.
The house vibrated when the gusts really picked up. I threw up twice.
Destroyed homes were left in the storm's wake, as well as toppled trees and debris on roads. Some neighborhoods experienced significant flooding, but the Tampa Bay area appeared to have escaped the storm surge that had prompted the most dire warnings. In St. Petersburg, the roof was torn off Tropicana Field, a staging area for first responders, and a large construction crane collapsed. As of Thursday afternoon, Hurricane Milton had plowed into the Atlantic Ocean, but residents were not yet in the clear. The state was still in danger of river flooding after as much as 18 inches of rainfall.
Born and raised here, never seen nothing like this.
And President Biden and Vice President Harris were down there meeting with local officials and comforting families, asking how they could help. And Donald Trump at a rally just started making up stories about the Biden administration withholding aid from Republican areas and siphoning off aid to give to undocumented immigrants. Just made the stuff up. Everybody knew it wasn't true. When did that become okay? Why would we go along with that? And by the way, I'm sorry, gentlemen, I've noticed this especially with some men who seem to think Trump's behavior, the bullying and the putting people down, is a sign of strength. And I am here to tell you that is not what real strength is. It never has been. Real strength is about working hard and carrying a heavy load without complaining. Real strength is about taking responsibility for your actions and telling the truth even when it's inconvenient. Real strength is about helping people who need it and standing up for those who can't always stand up for themselves. That is what we should want for our daughters and for our sons, and that is what I want to see in a president of the United States of America.